Hey everyone, I hope your day's been amazing. Mine was all right. Let's check in, drop a 1 to 10 in the comments and let me know how your day went. Before you settle in, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps. Now, let's manifest some good dreams. If you could dream about anything tonight, what would it be? Drop it below. All right, time to unwind. Turn off the lights, get cozy, take a deep breath, and let's drift off to sleep. When I was 10 years old, I thought I understood the world. I was at that age where everything felt big, not in a scary way, but in a way that made life feel like an adventure. I had just started walking home from school alone, a privilege I had begged my parents for. A taste of independence. I was the kind of kid who never turned down a dare, who scraped his knees climbing fences just to see if he could. I had a best friend named Jake, and we spent most afternoons seeing who could throw rocks the farthest, or trying to build forts out of whatever junk we could find in the vacant lot near our neighborhood. I loved baseball, hated math, and could eat an entire box of cereal in one sitting if nobody stopped me. I was loud, restless, and absolutely convinced that nothing bad could ever really happen to me. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. It was a Friday afternoon in early spring, the air warm but breezy, the sun hanging low in the sky. The last bell had rung, and kids poured out of the school like ants from a disturbed hill, shouting and laughing, weaving between each other in little clusters. I waved to Jake, who was getting picked up by his mom. "Want me to tell your mom to drive you home?" he asked, climbing into the passenger seat of their old blue station wagon. "Nah," I said, slinging my backpack over one shoulder. "I got it." Jake rolled his eyes. "You just like feeling like an adult." I grinned. "Exactly." He laughed, shaking his head, and I watched as the car pulled away, kicking up dust as it disappeared down the road. I turned toward the sidewalk and started my walk home. I lived less than a mile from the school, not far, but far enough. The route was familiar, past the playground, past the baseball field, down 2 quiet streets lined with squat brick houses and patchy front lawns. It was peaceful. At first, I was about halfway home when I saw it. A white van parked just past the playground, idling near the curb. It wasn't unusual to see cars parked near the school, but something about this one made my stomach feel heavy. The windows were tinted, the paint was dull, slightly dirty. The kind of car you don't really notice. I didn't think much of it at first. I kept walking, kicking a stray pebble along the sidewalk, trying to see how many times I could hit it before it veered into the grass. But then, the van's engine rumbled. I glanced up, my heartbeat skipping slightly. It was moving, slowly, creeping along the curb, keeping pace with me. A chill snuck up my spine. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe they were looking for an address. Maybe they were picking someone up. But something in the back of my mind whispered, "Number." I kept walking, my fingers curling around the strap of my backpack. My ears were ringing slightly, though I couldn't figure out why. The van kept moving. I stopped to tie my shoe just to see. It stopped too. My hands felt clammy as I straightened up, my legs suddenly itching to run. This was stupid. Nothing was happening. But my instincts, that primal part of me that hadn't existed before today, was screaming at me. Keep moving. So I did. Faster this time. Not quite running, not quite walking. Just moving. My house was close. I could make it. The van sped up. My chest felt tight, my breath coming quicker. This wasn't right. I turned my head slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of the driver through the window. But I couldn't see him. The sun was reflecting off the glass, turning it into a mirror. All I saw was myself, small, pale, wide-eyed. And then the van stopped, directly across the street from my driveway. A lump lodged itself in my throat. I was home. I was safe. I could run inside, tell my parents, lock the door. Then the driver's side window rolled down. A man leaned out, smiling. His face was wrong. The kind of face you forget the moment you look away. No defining features. Just a too wide mouth, slightly crooked teeth, and eyes that never blinked. My skin prickled. Something about him felt off. Then he spoke, and my body turned to ice. Liam. My name. He said my name. Not hey kid, not do you need a ride. Just my name. Like he had known me, like we had met before. Except I had never seen this man in my entire life. My body moved before my brain did. I bolted, straight up my driveway, skipping the front steps entirely, my heart slamming against my ribs. I fumbled for the door handle, my fingers slipping on the knob. Finally, the door swung open. I threw myself inside, locked it, and then silence. No footsteps. No van door opening. No engine revving. Just the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. I sucked in a breath, my entire body trembling. Then I turned. Pressed my face to the window, just enough to peek out. The van was gone. I didn't tell my parents. I don't know why. Maybe because, at 10 years old, I still didn't quite understand what had almost happened. Or maybe I didn't want to admit that, for the first time in my life, I had been truly afraid. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man smile. His teeth slightly crooked, his eyes too still, and the way he had spoken my name, like he had been waiting for me, like he had been watching. And for the first time I thought, what if this wasn't the first time he'd seen me? What if this was just the first time I had noticed him? I didn't sleep that night, not even close. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my body stiff with leftover fear. Every sound from outside, the rustling of leaves, the occasional car rolling down the street, made my heart jump into my throat. I kept picturing it. The van. The man's face. The way he said my name, like he had known me forever. And the worst part? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had never told anyone my walking route. Not my friends, not even my parents. I had begged them to let me walk home alone, swore up and down that I knew the way, that I wouldn't take shortcuts, that I'd always come straight back. They finally agreed on one condition: I had to stick to the same route every day. I had, and somehow that man had known exactly where to find me. The next morning, everything felt off. I went through the motions, got dressed, ate my cereal, packed my bag, but it felt like I was watching myself do it from outside my own body. At breakfast, my mom noticed. "You're quiet," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Everything okay?" I shrugged, tired. She didn't push. I almost told her. I almost opened my mouth and said, "Mom, a guy in a van followed me home yesterday. He knew my name." But what if she didn't believe me? Or worse, what if she did? What if she never let me go anywhere alone again? I had fought so hard for my independence, for freedom. If I told her, it would be over. So I kept my mouth shut. And for the first time ever, I dreaded walking to school. The morning walk felt different. Everything looked the same, the sidewalk, the houses, the park, but the feeling had shifted. Like the entire world was holding its breath. Every car that passed made my skin crawl. I kept expecting to see that van, that exact shade of white, those tinted windows. Every time I heard an engine slow down, my stomach tightened. But I made it to school in one piece, and nothing happened. No van, no weird men watching from across the street. By lunchtime, I had almost convinced myself I had overreacted. Almost. Jake noticed something was off. "You're being weird," he said, shoving half a peanut butter sandwich into his mouth. I scowled. "No, I'm not." "Yeah, you are," he swallowed. "You keep looking around like you're about to get attacked." I hesitated. Jake was my best friend. We had known each other since first grade. If anyone would believe me, it was him. So I told him, not everything, just the basics. Some guy in a white van had been following me. He had stopped in front of my house and said my name. Jake's chewing slowed. "Dude, I know. You should tell your parents." I shook my head. "They'll never let me walk home alone again." Jake frowned, picking at the crust of his sandwich. After a moment, he said, "Okay, then I'll walk with you." That made my chest loosen a little. "You sure?" I asked. Jake smirked. "Duh. What if you're making it up? I gotta see for myself." I rolled my eyes. Classic Jake. But I was grateful. Because the thought of walking home alone again made my stomach feel wrong. The day dragged. Every time I glanced at the clock, only 5 minutes had passed. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. Not just of the man, not just of the van. I was scared because I didn't know why he was there. What if I was just being paranoid? What if he had just been some random guy in a car, parked on the wrong street at the wrong time? But then why had he known my name? By the time the last bell rang, my legs felt shaky. Jake met me outside. "Ready?" I nodded. We started walking. For the first few blocks, nothing happened. Jake was talking about some new video game he wanted, something about laser guns and spaceships. I tried to listen, tried to pretend like everything was normal. But my brain was stuck on the thought, would the van be there again? I glanced behind us. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, unclenching my fists. See, nothing to worry about. Then we turned the corner, and I saw it. Parked right across from the playground. Same white van. Same tinted windows. Jake was still talking, oblivious. I stopped. He noticed and followed my gaze. His voice dropped. "No way." I swallowed. We stood there, neither of us moving, just staring at it. The engine was off. No signs of movement. But I knew. I knew whoever was inside was watching. Jake shifted beside me. "Dude, that's messed up." I nodded, unable to speak. A part of me wanted to run. The other part wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it. "Let's go," Jake muttered, grabbing my sleeve. I let him pull me forward, my pulse hammering. I kept my eyes straight ahead. "Don't look. Don't look." But as we walked, the van's engine rumbled to life, and I felt every hair on my body stand up. Jake cursed under his breath. It's moving. I already knew, because I could hear it. The slow roll of tires against pavement, keeping pace with us, the same way it had yesterday. I fought the urge to run. I could feel my chest tightening, my hands clammy. The van was creeping along the curb, just far enough behind us that if someone looked out their window, they wouldn't think much of it. But we knew. Jake muttered, "This is bad, man." I nodded, stomach twisting. I didn't know what to do. Jake whispered, "When I say go, we run, cut through the yards." I swallowed. Okay. The van sped up. Jake tensed. Go. We bolted, cutting across the first yard, jumping over flower beds, feet pounding against the grass. I heard the van's tires screech. The engine revved. I didn't dare look back. We jumped a low fence, stumbled through someone's bushes, my backpack slamming against my spine. The street was ahead, my house was ahead. Almost there. Almost safe. But then, the van stopped, right at the edge of my driveway. The driver's side window rolled down, and the man leaned out. That same crooked smile, and in that too calm voice he said, "Liam, you don't have to run." I almost threw up, because it wasn't just my name this time. He said, "I'll see you soon." And then he drove away, like nothing had happened, like he was giving me time, like he was letting me wait. Jake and I stood frozen in my driveway, watching the van disappear. It didn't speed away like a getaway car. It didn't screech around a corner or try to lose us. It just drove off, slowly, casually, like it knew something we didn't, like it had all the time in the world. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I was panting hard, shaking, but my feet wouldn't move. My brain felt foggy, like it was struggling to process what had just happened. Then Jake finally said it. "Liam, what the fuck?" I couldn't answer. I turned, walked up the steps, and pushed open my front door, Jake trailing behind. The second we stepped inside, I locked the door. Double-checked it. Checked it again. Jake was pacing now, running a hand through his hair. Dude, what the hell was that? My mouth was dry. My heart was still pounding. I tried to speak, but the words got stuck. Jake wasn't waiting for an answer. He whirled toward me. That guy knew your name. That guy, he was waiting for us. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. I know. He stared at me. How? How does he know you? I shook my head, genuinely terrified. I don't know. Because I didn't. I had never seen him before, never met him. But the way he had spoken, the way he had smiled, it wasn't like a stranger. It was like someone who had been watching for a long time. We sat in my kitchen, not saying much. Jake kept checking his phone, kept swearing under his breath. "Call the cops," he said suddenly. I hesitated. "Jake." "Number, call the cops, Liam. That guy followed us. That guy knows your name." I took a deep breath. The idea made sense, but something about it felt wrong. Like it wouldn't help. Like whoever that man was, he wouldn't just stop because the police knocked on his door. But I had no other option. I pulled out my phone and dialed. The ringing felt way too loud. Then click. 911, what's your emergency? I licked my lips. Hi, Aya. I think someone's following me. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Can you tell me what happened? I took a breath. There was this white van. It was parked near my school, and then it followed me home, twice, and the guy inside, he said my name. A pause. Then he spoke to you? Yeah, I said, gripping the phone tighter, and today he told me he'd see me soon. I expected the dispatcher to sound alarmed, but her tone was neutral, professional. Did he try to get out of the vehicle? Approach you? Number. Another pause. Did he threaten you? I hesitated. I mean, he said he'd see me soon. Isn't that a threat? The dispatcher sighed, like she'd heard this before. Do you have a description of the driver? I tried to think, but the details slipped through my fingers. I could picture the smile, the crooked teeth, but his hair, his clothes, his age, I had no idea. I forced myself to say something. White guy, maybe 40? The dispatcher exhaled. Did the vehicle have any distinguishing features? Stickers, damage, a license plate? License plate. Why hadn't I looked? It was just a white van. The dispatcher was quiet for a second. Then, I can send an officer to patrol your street, but if he didn't get out of the car or make a direct threat, there's not much we can do. My stomach sank. That's it, I whispered. If you see him again, try to get a plate number and call us back. In the meantime, stay safe and be aware of your surroundings. Click. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. Jake stared at me. Did they say they were going to do anything? I shook my head. His jaw clenched. That's bullshit. I didn't disagree. That night, I locked every door, every window. Checked them twice. My brain felt fried from stress, but my body wouldn't let me rest. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting, listening. The street outside was quiet. No engines, no movement. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I got up and looked out my window, I'd see headlights parked just down the road. Waiting. I wasn't wrong. The next morning, I barely ate, didn't want to go to school, didn't want to step outside. But I had to. Jake met me at my driveway. Neither of us said anything. We just started walking, and then halfway down the street, Jake stopped. I turned. What? Then I saw it. The van, parked further down the block, facing us. Jake swore under his breath. I felt actual nausea. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. Get the plate number, Jake muttered. I focused, read the numbers, typed them into my phone. We turned a corner, kept walking, didn't speak. Then I looked back. The van was gone. I gave the plate number to the police that afternoon. They called back 2 hours later. A male officer cleared his throat. Son, you sure you got the plate right? My stomach turned. Yeah, why? The officer hesitated. Then, in a careful, measured voice, he said, that van was reported abandoned 15 years ago. The room spun. I swallowed hard. That doesn't make sense. Another pause. It was found torched in a field 2 towns over, the officer said. No owner, no explanation. I didn't know what to say, because there was only one possibility. Either the police had the wrong records, or the van was never supposed to exist anymore. Either way, it was still here, still driving, still following me. Jake slept over that night. We stayed up with the lights on, whispering about possibilities. But nothing made sense. None of it. I checked outside every hour. No van. I told myself that meant we were safe, that it was over. Until around 2 a.m., when I heard something. Not an engine. Not tires on pavement. A sound so soft, so faint. I almost thought I imagined it, but I didn't. Because it came again. A whisper. Right outside my window. "Liam, I told you I'd see you soon." I stopped breathing. The whisper had been so faint, so close. Like whoever had said it was just beyond the glass. I sat up slowly, the blanket tangled around my legs, my heart slamming against my ribs. Jake was still asleep beside me, his body curled toward the edge of the bed. He hadn't heard it. I turned toward the window. The blinds were shut, the room was dark. But I could feel something just on the other side. Watching. Waiting. I had to look. I didn't want to. But some part of me, some sick, terrified part of me, had to see if he was really there. I moved slowly, trying not to wake Jake. My breath felt shaky, uneven. I reached out, curling my fingers under the edge of the blinds, my stomach twisting. Then I yanked them up. My breath caught. The street below was empty. No van. No one outside. But then, a sound. Soft. From above. I tilted my head up and froze. A handprint. On the glass. Not smudged, not fading. Fresh. A mark left behind, fingers spread wide. Too high up for a normal person to reach. I stumbled back, slamming into my dresser. Jake jolted awake, blinking in confusion. "What?" I pointed at the window, my mouth opening, but no words came out. Jake rubbed his face. "Dude, what's wrong?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because I realized something else. The print wasn't made by a bare hand. It was smeared. Like the fingers had been wrapped in fabric. Gloves. I turned to Jake, my voice barely above a whisper. He was here. Jake frowned. "Who?" I swallowed hard. "The guy. From the van." Jake's face changed. The sleepiness drained away, replaced by something sharp. "How do you know?" I pointed at the handprint. He followed my gaze. His eyes widened. He stared at it for a long time. Then finally, "Call the police." I did. My hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled the buttons twice. By the time I got through, my voice didn't even sound like mine. I told them everything. The van, the man, the whisper. The handprint on my third-story window. The dispatcher was quiet for a second. Then, "Stay inside. Lock all your doors and windows. Officers are on their way." I hung up. Jake was already moving. He double-checked the locks, pulled the blinds all the way down. The room felt too small. Like the walls were closing in. We waited. It felt like forever. Thina knock. I flinched. Jake grabbed my arm. "Dude, the cops." "Right." I moved stiffly toward the door, my breath too shallow. I cracked it open. A uniformed officer stood on the other side, his partner just behind him. "Liam Parker?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "You said someone was outside your window." I stepped aside, letting them in. The next few minutes were a blur. I told them everything. How it started. The van following me. The man knowing my name. How the police had traced the license plate to an abandoned vehicle from 15 years ago. And then, finally, what happened tonight. The whisper. The handprint on the glass. One of the officers pulled out a flashlight and walked to the window. He lifted the blinds, shining the beam over the glass. Jake and I watched in silence. The cop's face didn't change, but he turned slightly to his partner. "You seeing this?" The other officer nodded. "Yeah." He crouched by the window, looking down. My stomach tightened. Finally, the first cop turned back to me. "Your apartment doesn't have a fire escape, correct?" I shook my head. Number nothing to stand on. He exhaled slowly. "Then how the hell did someone leave a handprint up here?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Jake shifted beside me. "Do you think he climbed up?" The officers exchanged a look. Then finally, "We need to check something." We followed them outside. The cold air hit me like a slap, making my skin prickle. The officers walked around the side of the building, shining their flashlights upward. I followed their gaze and felt actual nausea. The glass was too high up. There was no ladder, no ledge, nothing a person could use to reach it. One of the officers let out a low breath. "Jesus." The other one turned to me. "You sure you didn't see anyone?" My throat felt dry. "I don't know. I didn't open the window. I just heard him." The first officer scanned the area. Then he froze. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. Footprints, leading away from the building, away from my window. The prints weren't deep, just impressions in the damp grass. But they stretched down the alley, down the street, disappearing into the dark. The officer lifted his radio. "We need backup." His voice was tight, serious. Jake's breathing was uneven beside me. What the hell is happening? I didn't know. I had no idea. But one thing was certain. The man was real. The van was real. The whispers, the following. And I wasn't imagining it. The police stayed for hours. They searched the neighborhood, checked security footage. Nothing. Like he had never been there. Like he had never existed. But I knew. I knew. And the police did too. Because when one of the officers sat me down before they left, he didn't say, "Don't worry, kid. It was just in your head." Instead, he said, "Keep your doors locked, and if you see him again, don't try to handle it yourself. Call us, immediately." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I never saw the van again. Never heard the whisper outside my window. But the feeling never left me. The feeling that he was still out there. That maybe he was just waiting. For another opportunity. For the right moment. For the next time I was alone. And to this day, whenever I walk down a quiet street and hear the faint hum of an engine behind me, I can't help but look over my shoulder. Just in case. Because I know. Somewhere, he still remembers my name. And maybe one day, he'll decide it's time to say it again. All right, I don't even know where to start. because I feel like I'm losing my mind. This happened 3 nights ago, and I haven't been back to my apartment since. I don't know if I should call the cops or if I'm just being paranoid, but something is wrong. It started last week when I found a Craigslist listing for a free couch. I know that sounds sketchy, but hear me out. I'm a broke college student, and my current couch is practically disintegrating. So when I saw an ad for a decent-looking couch in my area, I jumped on it. The guy who posted it responded almost immediately, way too eager to give it away. He didn't even ask for money or help moving. Eth just said, "I'll bring it over tonight. What's your address?" That should have been a red flag, right? But I was too excited about the free couch to care. Later that night, around 9 p.m., an old pickup truck pulled up in front of my apartment. The driver was a thin, middle-aged guy, balding, maybe late 40s. He barely made eye contact as he stepped out of the truck. No small talk, no introductions, just walked around to the back and yanked the couch out like he couldn't get rid of it fast enough. I was standing in the doorway, kind of hesitant. I had expected him to at least ask for help moving it inside, but he insisted on carrying it himself. And he was strong. This thing wasn't light, but he dragged it up my stairs alone like it weighed nothing. The whole time he didn't say a word. Just set it down in my living room, nodded, and walked out before I could even thank him. The whole interaction lasted maybe 5 minutes, but something about it felt off, like he was in a hurry, like he wanted to be gone before I could ask questions. But again, free couch. That night, I lounged on it for hours, scrolling my phone, watching television, totally normal, nothing weird. Until I woke up at 3:30 a.m. to a faint knocking sound. I live alone, and the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the apartment. I sat up, heart pounding. The knocking was soft, rhythmic, like something tapping against wood. I turned on every light, searched the whole place, checked the front door, checked the closet. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Maybe the building was settling, or the wind was rattling something. It didn't help that I was running on like 4 hours of sleep. I pushed the thought away, and the next morning I forgot about it. The next night I stayed up late again. Around midnight I started feeling weird about the couch, like the cushions felt different. Not wrong, just off, like they were softer than before, almost hollow. I pressed down harder, and that's when I felt it. Something solid under the cushion, something hidden inside the couch. My stomach twisted. I unzipped the fabric, hesitating, already feeling like I didn't want to know what was inside. And then I found it. A small black camera. It was taped into a hidden compartment, wedged deep inside the frame. My hands started shaking as I pulled it out, fingers slick with sweat. The lens was facing outward, as in, it had been recording the room. I froze. My brain refused to process it. I turned it over in my hands. It was still on, a tiny red blinking light. I immediately yanked out the memory card, shoved it into my laptop, and opened the most recent video file. The footage was from the night before. It showed my own apartment, my own living room, me sitting on the couch, scrolling my phone, totally oblivious. I felt sick, but then the footage kept going. At 3:46 a.m., I saw myself asleep in my bedroom. The room was dark. Everything was still. And then the fabric of the couch moved. I watched, horrified, as the bottom of the couch lifted just a fraction of an inch, like something inside had shifted. Then the video cut off. I slammed my laptop shut, my whole body shaking. This wasn't just a hidden camera. Someone had been inside the couch. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "I see you found my spot. Mind if I come back in?" I lost it, grabbed my keys, ran out of my apartment so fast I almost tripped. I haven't been back since. I called my landlord. I didn't know what to say, just that something was wrong and that I needed someone to check my unit. An hour later, I got a call back. The door was locked when we got there. No signs of a break-in. I could barely speak. "Did you check the couch?" A pause. Then, "What couch?" My stomach dropped. I made them go back and check. They searched the whole apartment. No couch. Nothing. Like it had never been there. I checked Craigslist, tried to find the original listing. It was gone. The guy who gave it to me, account deleted. It was like the whole thing had never happened. But I know it did. I haven't been back to my apartment. I don't want to be. Because now, I can't stop thinking about it. That couch was big. And if there was space inside it for a camera, there was space inside it for something else. Or someone else. And I think they got out. I was 7 years old the first time I saw him. My mother used to tuck me in every night, brushing my hair back as she whispered a quiet, "I love you," before clicking off the bedside lamp. I would always watch her silhouette linger in the doorway for a few extra seconds before she pulled it shut. That was the part I dreaded the most, the final click of the door. Because that's when I knew he would come. At first I thought it was my imagination, the way the dark corners of my bedroom seemed to shift after the lights went out, the way my eyes would struggle to adjust to the swallowing blackness. I would lay perfectly still under my blankets, too afraid to move, waiting for my eyes to betray me by shaping something sinister out of the shadows. And then one night, I realized I wasn't imagining him at all. I don't remember the exact moment I knew he was real. Maybe it was the way the air changed, how it felt thicker, as though the room had been plunged under water. Maybe it was the sound, that nearly imperceptible scrape of something dragging against my hardwood floor, stopping just as I held my breath to listen. I used to tell myself it was just the house settling, but deep down I knew better. He was always there, in the corner, waiting. Of course, I told my mother. She did what mothers do, listened with patience, stroked my hair, reassured me. "It's just a bad dream, sweetheart," she'd say, pressing a warm kiss to my forehead. She tucked the blankets around me a little tighter that night, as if that would keep him out. It didn't. Years passed, and the shape in the corner remained. I stopped telling people about him. I learned to live with it. Maybe I even convinced myself that my mind had created him, that he was just the residue of childhood fear lingering in the back of my brain. He never moved, never spoke, never did anything at all. Until last night. The first time I ever experienced sleep paralysis, I was 15. It happened in the early hours of the morning, sometime around 3 a.m. I remember waking up to a crushing weight pressing down on my chest, my limbs stiff as if they had been filled with cement. At first, I thought it was a dream. The kind where you're awake but your body refuses to cooperate. Then, I saw him. He was standing in the corner of my room. He had always been there, but this time I knew something was different. Before, he had been nothing more than a shape, a trick of the light, a shadow sculpted by my subconscious fears. But now, I could see him. His outline was sharper, clearer. He was tall, much taller than I had imagined, his frame elongated in a way that defied anatomy. His shoulders jutted unnaturally, his arms hanging like dead weight at his sides. His head was cocked slightly to one side, as though he were studying me, considering something. I tried to move, but my body refused. My lungs burned as panic set in. The more I struggled, the heavier the weight on my chest became. It was as if something was pushing me deeper into the mattress, keeping me still, keeping me silent. My fingers twitched at my sides, the only part of me that seemed capable of motion. I willed myself to wake up. And then he did something he had never done before. He took a step forward. It was slight, barely perceptible, but I saw it. The shift in weight, the quiet scrape of movement. I had spent my entire life watching him, and he had never moved before, not once. But now, with my body locked in place, with my throat unable to release even the smallest scream, he stepped closer. The pressure on my chest grew unbearable. My vision blurred at the edges. I don't remember how long I fought against my own body, but eventually I must have blacked out. When I woke up, it was morning. The sunlight streamed through my blinds, casting soft golden beams across my bedroom floor. My body felt normal again, no longer weighed down by that crushing force. I sat up, breathless, my heart still hammering in my chest. My first thought was that it had just been sleep paralysis, that my mind had fabricated the entire experience in that strange liminal space between waking and dreaming. But then I saw them. Footprints. Faint, but unmistakable. A trail of dusty imprints leading from the corner of my room to the side of my bed. I stared at them for what felt like an eternity. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to find another explanation. Maybe I had walked in my sleep, though I had never done that before. Maybe it was just dirt from my own shoes, scattered randomly in a way that only looked like footprints. But I knew the truth. They weren't mine. That day I barely spoke. I went through the motions, brushing my teeth, getting dressed, pretending to listen in school. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying the memory over and over, searching for something I had missed. By the time night fell, I felt like I was coming apart at the seams. I considered sleeping with the light on. I even pulled out my phone to Google whether that would help, but the idea seemed childish. Instead, I decided to keep my bedside lamp on the lowest setting. A compromise. I kept my phone under my pillow that night, my thumb resting over the lock button. If it happened again, I would force myself awake. But something strange happened. I woke up at exactly 3:47 a.m. No sleep paralysis this time, no crushing weight, no suffocating fear, just a stillness in the air that felt unnatural. My skin prickled as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to glance toward the corner. I could feel him there, though. My instincts screamed at me not to look. And then my phone vibrated. A single notification. I swallowed the lump in my throat and reached for it, my fingers fumbling as I lifted the screen toward my face. My breath caught in my throat. A message. From an unknown number. You shouldn't have watched. My entire body went cold. I turned my head slowly toward the corner of the room. This time, he wasn't standing there. He was closer. And for the first time I saw his face, I couldn't move. Not because of sleep paralysis, not because of some unseen force pinning me down. I just couldn't will my body to respond. The kind of paralysis that comes from pure, unfiltered fear. I had spent my entire life catching glimpses of him, shadows at the edge of my vision, a presence I convinced myself wasn't real. But now he wasn't lingering in the darkness. He wasn't hiding in the corner. He was standing right next to my bed. For the first time I could see him, not just as a shadow, not just as an outline against the wall, but as something real. His face, or what should have been his faces, a void, not a black, empty hole, but something worse, a smudged, distorted absence. My mind tried to give it features, to make sense of it, but the more I stared, the more it refused to take shape. It was like looking at something unfinished in image that flickered and blurred the harder I tried to focus. His body was impossibly thin, his limbs too long, his fingers nearly skeletal. But the worst part, he was breathing. Not loudly, not exaggerated, but subtle quiet enough that I could just barely hear the intake of air beneath the thudding of my own heartbeat. He was alive. My fingers twitched against the blanket, my lungs screamed for air, but I barely breathed. Any movement, any sign that I was awake felt like a death sentence. I didn't know why, I just knew. And then he moved. Not a slow, dramatic gesture, just a tilt of the head, a simple, curious movement. He knew I was awake. The air in the room felt wrong, like something pressing against my skin, weighing down on my chest. My mind raced, grasping for any explanation. A dream, a hallucination, sleep paralysis again. But sleep paralysis didn't explain the footprints. It didn't explain the message on my phone. It didn't explain how he was getting closer each night. I forced my breath to slow. If I stayed perfectly still, if I didn't react, maybe he would. He leaned forward. Just slightly, just enough that I could hear the faintest creak of the wooden floor beneath him. I squeezed my eyes shut, my body stiff, my fingers pressing into the mattress. Maybe this was the part where I woke up. Maybe if I waited long enough, if I held still, I would blink and find myself alone. Something touched my face. A hand, his hand. It was cold, clammy, not corpse cold, but something worse. The kind of cold that felt wrong, like something that had never been alive to begin with. My stomach twisted violently. My body screamed at me to do something, but I couldn't. His fingers trailed along my cheek, deliberate, slow. Then he gripped my jaw. Not tightly, not aggressively, just firm enough that I knew that he had complete control over me. The pressure on my jaw increased. My skin burned where he touched me, but it wasn't heat, it was something else, like the sensation you get when your foot falls asleep. Pins and needles, but deeper, radiating through my bones. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to do anything but lie there and let him touch me. Then, without warning, he let go. The weight pressing down on the air around me lifted. The burning sensation in my skin vanished. I opened my eyes. He was gone. I gasped, sucking in air as my body snapped back into motion. My chest ached. My jaw still tingled where he had touched me. My sheets were soaked in sweat. I scrambled upright, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. The message was still there. You shouldn't have watched. I checked the time, 3:49 a.m. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my knees almost buckling when they hit the floor. I stumbled toward my light switch, flipping it on. My bedroom was empty. I wanted to believe it had been a nightmare, but I knew it hadn't been. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't making up monsters in the dark. Something had been in my room, and it had touched me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in the corner of my room, my back pressed against the wall, my eyes darting between the doorway and the place where he had stood. Every time my eyelids started to droop, I forced them open again. By morning, I felt hollowed out. My limbs were heavy, my thoughts sluggish, but I didn't care. I was awake, and I was alive. I spent the day trying to convince myself that it was over, that whatever happened the night before had been some kind of fluke. But part of me knew better. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? There's something in my room that only comes at night, and last night it touched me. No one would believe me. I spent the entire day in a haze, watching the clock with growing dread. When the sun started to set, my stomach twisted. I thought about leaving, maybe booking a cheap motel, staying anywhere but here, but I was too afraid that he would follow me. So instead, I prepared. I set up my phone on a stack of books, facing my bed. If it happened again, I would have proof. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a baseball baton, kept it within arm's reach. It was a stupid plan. I didn't even know if this thing was human, let alone if it could be hurt. But it was the only thing I could do to convince myself I had some kind of control. By 11 p.m., I was exhausted. I wanted nothing more than to collapse, to shut my eyes and drift into unconsciousness. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I lay in bed, the bat close by, my phone recording, my lamp on its lowest setting. My heart pounded with every passing hour. Midnight. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. I fought sleep as long as I could, but I was so tired. Eventually my body betrayed me. I drifted off. And when I woke up, I couldn't move. I didn't even have to look. I knew he was there. This time I could feel his breath on my skin. My eyes refused to open, but I felt him. His breath wasn't warm. It wasn't cold either. It was wrong, like the absence of breath, a presence that sucked the air from the room rather than exhaling it. Every nerve in my body screamed to move, to run, but I was trapped in that familiar suffocating paralysis. I didn't have to look. I knew he was closer. The bed dipped. Not much, just enough for the mattress to creak, for the weight to shift beneath me. My fingers twitched against the sheets, the only part of me that could move. He was sitting on my bed. A quiet, unnatural noise filled the room. A clicking. At first, I thought it was the sound of my own teeth chattering, but no, it was coming from him, like joints snapping into place. Like something adjusting itself. And then, a hand wrapped around my wrist. A burning sensation shot through my arm, like ice searing straight through my veins. My body reacted without me, my fingers spasming, my pulse hammering beneath his grip. The bed dipped again. He was leaning in. The smell hit me first, damp, like something left in the dark for too long. Rot, but not the kind you find in corpses, the kind that lingers in abandoned places, in forgotten corners where things fester. The whisper came next. Not from my ear, from inside my head. "You see me now." I wanted to scream. My lungs burned with the effort of trying. My body still refused to move, but I kept fighting, forcing my fingers to flex, my toes to curl. The grip on my wrist tightened. Pain. A deep, aching pain that crawled up my arm like something was seeping into me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block him out, trying to wake up, but it was real. More real than anything I had ever felt. The whisper came again. "You brought me here." Something snapped in my mind. Number. No, he wasn't in control. I was done being afraid. I forced my fingers to move, to curl, to clench. The instant I did, the grip on my wrist recoiled just slightly, just enough. I focused everything on my breath, on pushing air through my lungs, on reclaiming what was mine. I wasn't a helpless child anymore. He wasn't some unstoppable force. He was real, and that meant he could be defied. I gasped, really gasped, breaking through the invisible weight pinning me down. My chest expanded, my throat burned with air, and as soon as my lungs filled, I ripped my arm free. The bed lurched. The clicking sound stuttered, like something startled. And then, the pressure in the room shifted. I opened my eyes. He was still there, still sitting on the edge of my bed, his two long limbs bent at unnatural angles, his smudged, faceless void staring at me. But something had changed. I had moved. I had fought back. And he didn't like that. His form flickered, his body shifting like a dying signal on an old television screen. His limbs twitched, his posture tensing like an animal deciding whether to lunge or flee. I didn't give him the chance. I did something reckless, something insane. I lunged at him. My body crashed into the empty air where he had been. My hands grasped nothing. The second I made contact, the room tilted. A deafening silence swallowed the air, pressing against my skull like I had just been dropped into deep water. The entire world felt like it had been inverted. a horrible stomach-churning sensation of being flipped inside out. And then, it was gone. The weight, the paralysis, the wrongness in the air. I was alone. I gasped, my body trembling violently as I scrambled away from the bed, my back slamming into the wall. My breath came in short, frantic bursts. My wrist still ached where he had grabbed me, the skin red and raw, but he was gone. The room was silent. For the first time in my life, he wasn't there. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the empty space where he had been. Minutes, hours, it didn't matter. When the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I let out a shuddering breath. I knew. I had won. I didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. I kept my lights on, my door open, my phone in my hand, but nothing happened. No static, no sleep paralysis. No him. On the 3rd night, I forced myself to turn the lights off. It wasn't easy. Every nerve in my body expected him to return, to drag me back into that suffocating nightmare. But the moment my room went dark, I realized something. The air was normal. For the first time in my life, I felt alone. And it was the most comforting thing I had ever experienced. I slept through the night. In the morning, I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, no strange numbers. Just silence. I don't know what I did. I don't know why it worked, but something had changed. He was gone. For weeks, I waited for it to happen again. I expected to wake up and find him in the corner, to feel his breath against my skin, to hear that awful whisper inside my skull, but I never did. And eventually, I stopped waiting. I got my life back. That was 6 years ago. I never spoke about it, never tried to explain it, because how could I? No one would believe me. I don't think about him much anymore. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, some distant part of me expecting to see him standing there. But he never is. I still don't understand what he was. A shadow? A hallucination? Something worse? I don't know, and I don't want to. But sometimes when I turn off the lights at night, I hesitate. Not because I'm afraid, not really, but because I still remember the feeling of not being alone. And sometimes I wonder, did I make him leave? Or did he let me go? I don't want to know the answer. I just hope I never have to find out. I wasn't expecting much when I downloaded Tinder again. I had deleted it a while ago, sick of the same repetitive conversations, the same awkward first dates, the same guys who seemed charming for about a week before revealing that they had the personality of a damp paper towel. But boredom is a hell of a thing, and after a few drinks with my friends, I re-downloaded it on a whim. I told myself I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a distraction. That's when I matched with Daniel. Daniel wasn't like the usual guys I saw on Tinder. No gym selfies, no fish-holding pictures, no overly filtered group photos where you had to guess which one was him. His profile was tasteful. A picture of him standing by a lake, smiling in the sunlight. Another one of him cooking, wearing an apron over a plain t-shirt. One where he was sitting on a park bench, book in hand, caught mid-laugh like someone had snapped a picture at the perfect moment. And his bio? Short, simple. Adventurer at heart, movie addict. If you like late-night drives and good conversation, we'll get along just fine. I hesitated before swiping right, not because he seemed creepy, the opposite, actually. He seemed too perfect. But I swiped anyway. And we matched immediately. The first message came within minutes. Daniel, I was starting to think you weren't going to swipe right. I raised an eyebrow at my screen. Weird opening line, but maybe he was just being playful. Me? Oh, and why's that? Daniel, I saw you on here a few days ago, but then you disappeared. Figured you might have changed your mind about dating. I paused. I had only re-downloaded Tinder that night. There was no way he could have seen me on here before. Maybe he was confusing me with someone else. I let it slide. We started talking, and I'll admit was good at it. There was none of that awkward back and forth, none of the usual, "Hey, how's your day?" that leads nowhere. He was engaging, funny, charming in a way that felt effortless. Within minutes, it felt like I had known him for years. We liked the same movies, the same bands. We even had the same childhood Doga golden retriever named Buddy. That gave me pause. Me? No way. You had a buddy too? Daniel? Yeah, had him growing up. Best dog in the world. It was eerie. Of all the names, of all the dogs, what were the odds? But coincidences happen, right? And when someone is that perfect, you don't question it. You just go along with it. We talked every day after that. From the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, he was always there. If I texted, he responded immediately. If I didn't text, he'd check in with something cute, thinking about you, or hope your day's going well. It was nice. A guy who actually put in effort, who made me feel interesting. But then, little things started feeling off. The first red flag happened about a week in. We were talking about late-night cravings, and I mentioned how much I loved this small 24-hour diner across town, the kind of place that only locals know about. Daniel replied, "Oh yeah, you always get the grilled cheese there, right?" I blinked at my screen. I had never told him that. Me? Wait, how did you know that? Daniel, you mentioned it, didn't you? I hadn't. I even scrolled back through our messages just to be sure. Nothing. I brushed it off as a lucky guess. But then it happened again. One night, I was curled up on my couch, watching some old 70s horror movie, one of those weird niche ones that nobody ever talks about. I posted a quick Instagram story, nothing obvious, just a blurry shot of my screen, captioned "Classic." Minutes later, Daniel texted me. "Watching that without me? Rude." I froze. I hadn't told him what I was watching, hadn't even mentioned it in our conversation. I stared at my phone, fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Me? Wait, how did you know? Daniel, lucky guess. A joke, a brush off. I told myself I was overthinking it. But the next morning, I did something I should have done earlier. I reverse searched his Tinder photos and found nothing. No social media, no LinkedIn, no old posts, no comments, no tagged pictures. It was like he didn't exist. My stomach twisted. I kept scrolling through our texts, looking for something that could explain this away. But all I found were more coincidences. He knew my favorite places, knew things about my childhood, knew things I had never told him. I was just about to text him, to ask who the hell he really was, when my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Why are you looking me up?" I felt my entire body go cold. I hadn't texted him yet. hadn't said anything. He just knew. I stared at my phone, fingers numb. Me, what? A typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared again. Finally, the message came through. You don't have to look me up. I already know everything about you. I blocked his number, deleted Tinder, turned off my phone. For the rest of the night, I sat in my bed, heart pounding, waiting for what, I didn't know. When I woke up the next morning, I felt ridiculous. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I had overreacted. But then, I saw him. At my job. I was behind the counter, ringing up a customer, when I glanced toward the entrance. And he was there, standing just outside, watching me through the glass. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't smiling, wasn't waving, just staring. I turned to my coworker, panic rising in my chest. That guy out there, do you know him? She frowned, glancing at the entrance. Who? I turned back. He was gone. I was shook in bed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing outside the bookstore, watching me through the glass, his face blank, unreadable. The worst part? I knew I hadn't imagined it. I could still picture the way his head had been tilted slightly to the side, like he was studying me, like he was waiting for something. By morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe he had just happened to be in the area. Maybe it was coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So I did the only thing I could think of. I checked my phone. Even though I had blocked Daniel's number, I still felt the creeping anxiety of seeing another message. But there was nothing. No new texts. No calls. I should have felt relieved. But instead, the silence made it worse. At work, I felt like I was on edge all day. Every time the door opened, my stomach twisted. Every time someone walked past the windows, my pulse spiked. By the time my shift ended, I was so tense I felt physically sore. I waited for my coworker, Jenna, to finish closing up. I wasn't about to walk home alone tonight. She noticed my fidgeting. "You good?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she counted the cash drawer. I debated telling her. It sounded insane, but I couldn't keep it in. "You remember that Tinder guy I told you about?" Jenna looked up, curious. "The perfect one?" I swallowed. "Yeah, I think he's been watching me." Her eyebrows knit together. "What do you mean?" I told her everything. How he seemed to know things I hadn't told him. How he somehow knew I had searched for his photos. How he had showed up at the store. Jenna frowned. "That's weird. But are you sure you're not reading too much into it?" That was the problem. I wasn't sure. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was just freaking myself out. But the feeling of being watched hadn't left me since last night. Jenna, to her credit, didn't dismiss me. She grabbed her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and said, "Come on, I'll walk you home." We locked up the store and stepped outside. The night air was thick and humid, making my skin prickle. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet. We were halfway to my apartment when Jenna stopped walking. "You all right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer at first, just turned her head slightly, looking at something across the street. I followed her gaze. There, standing under the glow of a streetlight, was a man. Tall, still, watching us. He was too far away for me to see his face clearly, but I didn't need to. I knew it was him. My stomach twisted into knots. "Okay," Jenna whispered. "That's creepy as hell." I didn't breathe, didn't move, just kept my eyes locked on him, waiting for him to do something. Then, in the blink of an eye, he stepped backward into the shadows, not turning, not walking away, just fading into the dark. My throat felt tight. My legs were screaming at me to run. Jenna grabbed my arm. "Come on." We practically sprinted the last few blocks to my apartment. The entire time I felt eyes on the back of my neck. When we reached my building, Jenna insisted on staying over. I didn't argue. Once we were inside, I double-checked the locks, checked the windows, pulled the curtains shut. Jenna sat on the couch, running a hand through her hair. "Okay, yeah." That was actually terrifying. I sank down beside her, still shaking. What the hell does he want? She exhaled. "I don't know, but we're calling the cops." I hesitated. "And tell them what? A guy from Tinder is creeping me out?" She gave me a look. "Yes, that's exactly what we tell them." She wasn't wrong. But before we could even pick up the phone, my apartment buzzer went off. A shrill, loud ring that made both of us jump. Jenna's eyes snapped to mine. It was past midnight. Nobody ever buzzed my apartment this late. My breath hitched in my throat. Jenna moved first, grabbing my wrist and dragging me toward the intercom. I stared at the small screen, only static. I pressed the button, my voice shaking. "Hello?" Silence. Then, breathing. Slow, steady, controlled. A chill ran down my spine. Then a voice. "You shouldn't have blocked me." My blood turned to ice. Jenna grabbed my arm. "Hang up. Now." My fingers trembled over the button, but I didn't need to press it. The call ended on its own. We stood there, frozen. Then Jenna pulled me away from the door. "We're calling the cops, right now." I nodded, numb. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed. The operator picked up. I stammered through an explanation. A man was stalking me. He had showed up at my job. Now he was here. I didn't know what to do. They said they'd send someone over. Jenna and I sat on the couch, waiting, barely breathing. I checked the peephole every few minutes, but saw nothing. By the time the police arrived, the hallway was empty. They took my statement, but since the guy hadn't actually broken in or threatened me, there wasn't much they could do. "Call us if he comes back," the officer said. I wanted to scream. He was already here. Jenna stayed over that night. Neither of us slept. The next morning, we went through my phone together. And that's when we found it. A new text from an unknown number. "That was rude. I'll see you soon." Jenna swore under her breath. "We have to go. Now." I looked up at her, heart pounding. "Go where?" She swallowed. "Anywhere but here." We left that morning. Jenna was already throwing clothes into a bag before I even processed what was happening. "You're not staying here," she said firmly. "Get your stuff. We're going somewhere else." I nodded, moving like I was in a trance. I didn't argue. I didn't stop to think. I just grabbed what I could, shoving it into a backpack with trembling hands. We got into her car and drove. I kept checking behind us, watching the rearview mirror for anything out of place. A dark car that followed too long, a shape standing at the end of a sidewalk. But there was nothing. Nothing but my own paranoia crawling up the back of my neck. Jenna's cousin lived about an hour away, in a small house in a quiet neighborhood. He wasn't thrilled about unexpected guests, but the second Jenna told him what happened, he let us stay without hesitation. The house felt safe, safe in a way my apartment never had. The locks were sturdy, there were security cameras out front, and most importantly, nobody knew we were here. We turned off my phone. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. Because no matter how far we drove, I still felt him. Still imagined him standing outside, just past the streetlights. Still saw his face in the windows, in the dark reflections of glass. That night, I didn't sleep. Jenna passed out almost immediately, exhaustion catching up with her, but I just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking. How long had he been watching me? Had he seen me before Tinder? Had he followed me first, studied me, before making his profile? Had he planned this the whole time? My chest felt tight. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push the thoughts away, but that only made it worse. Because every time I closed them, I saw him at my job, at my door, standing beneath the streetlights. And I remembered the way he had stepped backward into the shadows, like he was playing with me, like he wasn't done yet. The next morning, Jenna forced me to go to the police station. I didn't want to. I felt stupid, like they'd just brush me off again, but Jenna wasn't having it. "We're reporting this. In person," she said. "They can't ignore you if you're standing right there." So we went. I sat in a cramped office and told them everything, every detail, every message, every time he showed up where he shouldn't be. The officer listened, took notes, asked questions. But at the end of it, he just sighed. "I get why you're scared," he said, rubbing his temple. "But the problem is, he hasn't committed a crime. You blocked him, right? You left the apartment. That's good. Just stay somewhere else for now. If he contacts you again, let us know." I felt sick. That was it. That was all they were going to do? I wanted to scream. Jenna must have seen the look on my face, because she put a hand on my arm, squeezing it tight. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go." We left, and I felt worse than before. Because now, I knew for sure nobody was going to help me. The last time I saw him was 3 days later. Jenna had gone out to grab food, leaving me alone for the first time since we left my apartment. I told myself I was fine. But as soon as the front door clicked shut, a weight settled on my chest. I tried to ignore it. I sat on the couch, flipping mindlessly through television channels, trying to convince myself I was safe. And then the doorbell rang. My heart stopped. Jenna wouldn't ring the doorbell. She had a key. I sat completely still, staring at the front door like it might suddenly explode inward. The doorbell rang again. I swallowed hard. My hands were shaking. I stood up, slowly. I walked to the door, my breath tight in my throat. I didn't open it. Didn't even unlock it. Instead, I pressed my eye to the peephole. And I saw him. Standing on the front porch. He wasn't smiling. Wasn't moving. Just watching me. The way he always did. Like he was waiting for me to react. I stumbled back, gasping for air. My stomach churned violently, my vision swimming. Number. No, he wasn't supposed to know where I was. I turned and ran for my phone. My hands were so slick with sweat, I could barely hold onto it. I dialed Jenna. She picked up instantly. "Hey, I just got." "He's here," I gasped. "Jenna, he's here." Silence. Then, "What? Who's there?" "Him." I heard her slam on the gas through the phone. "I'm coming. Lock the doors. Call the cops right now." I barely managed to dial 911, my fingers shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. The operator picked up. "What's your emergency?" "There's a man outside," I whispered. "He's been stalking me. He followed me here. He knows where I am." "Stay inside," the operator said immediately. "Is the door locked?" "Yes," I choked out. "Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." I kept my eyes on the door. He didn't move. Didn't knock. Didn't try to get in. Just stood there. And then he turned his head slightly, like he could see me, like he knew I was watching. And then, finally, he smiled. A slow, eerie smile that made my skin crawl. Then he stepped backward, fading into the shadows, just like before. By the time the cops arrived, he was gone. I never saw him again after that. The police took it seriously this time. They checked the security cameras. They found his face, his license plate. He had a record, not for anything big, but enough. They put out a restraining order, warned me to stay vigilant. I moved, changed my number, deleted Tinder forever. It's been almost a year now, and I'd like to say I don't think about him anymore. But I do. Sometimes when I pass a storefront window, I see a reflection behind me. When I'm out late, I feel like someone's watching. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up thinking I heard a doorbell. I don't go to check, because I know what I'll see. I'll see him, standing there, smiling, waiting. The first time I heard it, I assumed it was the wind. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap against the glass, barely audible over the hum of my ceiling fan. It wasn't unusual. My apartment was on the third floor of an old building, and sometimes the wind would rattle the windows just right, making strange sounds. I was half asleep, drifting in that hazy space between dreaming and waking, when I noticed it. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud, not frantic. Just patient. I turned over groggy, blinking at the red glow of my alarm clock. 2:47 a.m. Too tired to care. I pulled my blanket over my head, blocking out the noise, and let sleep take me again. The next morning, I barely remembered it. I only recalled the sound in flashes while making my coffee, like a forgotten detail from a dream. I rubbed at my temples, shaking off the feeling. It had been the wind. Nothing more. The week passed uneventfully. Work, gym, dinner, repeat. My life was uneventful, predictable. And then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I woke up instantly this time. The sound wasn't aggressive, not demanding. It was deliberate, like someone was waiting. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, the room too quiet. I glanced toward the window, but the blinds were drawn, the soft glow of a street lamp barely filtering through the slats. I listened. Nothing. The room felt off. Not in a way I could explain, just that deep, instinctual feeling that something wasn't quite right. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over the flashlight button. Then I hesitated. Do I really want to look? A stupid thought. There was nothing out there. I exhaled, shook my head, and forced myself to lie back down. I barely slept. By the third time, the sound had become routine. Like clockwork, once a week, always at the same time. 2:47 a.m. I tried to ignore it, but that only made it worse. Because once you notice something, once you realize it's happening at a pattern, you can't unnotice it. And suddenly, I was waiting for it. Lying in bed, holding my breath, watching the clock tick toward the inevitable moment. And like always, it came. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up slowly this time, expecting it. My pulse drummed in my ears. I turned toward the window. For the first time, I considered opening the blinds. But a new thought stopped me. What if I do, and there's something there? A chill ran down my spine. I swallowed hard, curling my fingers into the blanket, gripping it tight. You're being ridiculous. But my body wouldn't move. I sat there, frozen, waiting. Tap, tap, tap. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The next day, I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably a bird. That made sense, didn't it? Some dumb pigeon landing on the windowsill, pecking at the glass. Except, there was no ledge, no balcony, nothing for something to stand on. I grabbed my coat and went outside, staring up at my apartment window from the parking lot. The building was old, brick. My unit was 3 stories up, facing the alley. The only thing near my window was a drain pipe running alongside the building. I felt something cold and awful settle in my stomach. It was stupid. It was just a sound. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed, my back to the window, body tense with anticipation. I knew it wouldn't come. It had only ever happened once a week, and tonight wasn't the night. But I still waited. I couldn't help it. I kept picturing it, the glass behind me, the blinds. Something just outside looking in. I told myself to stop, to let it go. I closed my eyes, counted my breaths. Then, tap, tap, tap. My blood ran cold. I wasn't supposed to hear it tonight. But it was there. Soft, patient. like it was testing me. A new game. I turned, slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The blinds were still drawn, the window was closed. Nothing could get in. Nothing could reach up here. I inhaled sharply, fisted my hands in the sheets. And before I could stop myself, I whispered, "Hello?" Silence. The longest, deepest silence I had ever heard. Like the whole world had stopped. Then, a new sound. A soft, slow creak. The sound of a hand pressing against glass. Right on the other side. I shot up, grabbed my phone, thumb jamming against the flashlight button. I yanked up the blinds. The beam of light hit the window, and there was nothing. Just empty glass. No handprint, no shadow. No sign that anything had ever been there. But I knew. I knew. And this time, it wasn't leaving. The next morning, I checked the window. Nothing unusual, no scratches, no smudges. I tried to convince myself it had been in my head, that I had imagined the whole thing. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed proof. So that night, I set up my phone. Face down on my desk, camera tilted toward the window. If something was out there, I'd see it. If there was nothing, I'd sleep easier. I left it recording. And when 2:47 a.m. came, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move, didn't speak, just closed my eyes and let the sound crawl over me. Then, nothing. Silence. It was gone. I swallowed hard, finally allowing myself to relax. And as the minutes passed, I drifted into uneasy sleep, not knowing what I would find in the morning, not knowing that this time I had caught it. And when I pressed play on the video, it would be worse than I could have ever imagined. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The weight of the night still clung to method tapping, the waiting, the silence. For a moment, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart already beating too fast. Then I remembered. The recording. I sat up, reaching for my phone, fingers stiff from gripping the blanket too tightly in my sleep. The screen lit up with a soft glow, 6 hours of footage. I swallowed hard. This was it. Proof. My stomach churned as I hesitated. Do I really want to see what's on there? A stupid thought. Of course I do. I tapped play. The footage was boring at first. Just my room, bathed in soft darkness. The window sat still in the frame, the blinds down, the pale glow of the street lamp barely filtering through. I scrubbed through the first few hours. Nothing. Then, 2:47 a.m., my body tensed. The room on the screen remained still, no movement, no sounds. I frowned. The tapping had been clear as day to me last night. Had I imagined it? Then, just as I was about to fast forward, something moved. I almost dropped the phone. The blinds. They shifted. Not violently, not like the wind had caught them, but like something had brushed against them from the outside. A slow, subtle ripple across the fabric. A moment later, another movement. Lower this time, near the window latch. I leaned in, heart hammering. It was too dark to make out details, just a shadow shifting behind the thin blinds. Then, a shape, a hand. long fingers barely visible through the gaps in the slats gripping the window frame. I dropped the phone. My pulse spiked, cold dread slicing through my chest. I hadn't imagined it. Someone had been there. Right outside my window. 3 stories up. I sat frozen, staring at the phone, my breathing shallow, my ears buzzed with panic. This wasn't just some random noise. This wasn't a branch against the glass. This was a person. But how? How had they gotten up there? I forced myself to pick up the phone again, my fingers cold and stiff. I scrubbed through the footage, my stomach twisting with every second. The hand disappeared after a few moments, but the blinds shifted again, like someone was adjusting their grip. Then nothing. For the rest of the night, the window remained still. No more tapping. No more movement. Whoever or whatever had been there hadn't left a trace. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, my thoughts racing. I needed answers. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, making my way around the building. My apartment faced the back alley. No fire escape, no balconies, just a sheer drop to the pavement below. I stood there, staring up at my window, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. There was no way someone had climbed up there. No ledges, no footholds. The drain pipe was there, sure, but it was old, rusted. It barely looked strong enough to hold a cat, let alone a full-grown person. So how had they done it? And why? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I turned and hurried back inside. I needed to call someone. The police, maybe. But what would I even say? Hey, an invisible man is tapping on my window at 2:47 every night. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. Number. I needed something solid first. A clearer video. A face. Something real. That night, I set up the camera again. Only this time, I adjusted the angle. The lens pointed directly at the blinds. If something or some came back, I'd see it. I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind set me on edge. By the time 2:47 a.m. rolled around, I was already awake. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Then, tap, tap, tap. My breath hitched. I gripped the blanket, my entire body tense. I didn't move. Didn't dare to. The tapping was softer tonight, almost careful. Like it knew I was listening. Then, a new sound. Something light shifting against the glass. I felt a prickling sensation crawl up my arms. Was it a hand? Fingertips brushing over the window. I swallowed hard, willing myself to stay still. I'll see it in the morning. I just had to wait. Minutes passed. The tapping faded. Then silence. I waited another hour before allowing myself to sleep. At sunrise, I grabbed my phone instantly. My fingers trembled as I pulled up the footage, scrolling straight to 2:47 a.m. The video loaded. At first, it was just my room. Still, silent. Then, the tapping. Soft. Rhythmic. A shadow shifted behind the blinds. I held my breath. A hand appeared. Fingers curled around the window frame. And this time, it didn't disappear right away. It just stayed there, holding on. My chest tightened. Then suddenly, The blinds moved, like someone was leaning closer, peering in. My stomach twisted as I waited for a face to appear. Waited to see how hot was out there. But there was nothing. Just hands, long fingers gripping the frame. Hanging there, 3 stories up. No body, no face, nothing holding them up. I slammed the phone down. My breath came in short, shaky bursts. My entire body buzzed with fear. That wasn't human. That wasn't possible. My mind raced, grasping for logic, for any explanation that made sense. But there wasn't one. I reached for my phone again, fingers trembling, and forced myself to play the rest of the video. The hands stayed there for 2 full minutes. Then, they simply let go. Just released, as if whatever was holding them up had simply floated away. I clenched my jaw. This had to be a prank. It had to be. Some kind of sick joke. But I knew. Tomorrow night, it would come back. And next time, I wasn't sure if it would just be hands at the window. Next time, it might want more. I didn't leave my apartment that day. I couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my coffee cup, my phone lying in front of me, screen black. I hadn't rewatched the video. I couldn't. I already knew what I had seen. Hands. Just hands gripping the edge of my window frame. With nothing, no one holding them up. It had to be a trick. It had to be something explainable. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more my mind kept circling back to one impossible truth. It wasn't normal. And it was going to come back. By nightfall, I was exhausted. My brain felt fried, like I had spent the entire day running but never actually moving. I knew I should leave, stay with a friend, check into a motel, anything. But some sick part of me, some stubborn, stupid part, needed to see what would happen. So I set up my phone again. This time I positioned it differently, no more aiming at the blinds. Now it was directly in front of the window. If those hands came back, I'd get a clear shot. My heart pounded as I propped the phone against a stack of books, making sure the angle was perfect. The room felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like the air itself was waiting. I climbed into bed, my stomach twisted into knots. And then I waited. 2:47 a.m. The tapping started. Soft. Patient. I stared at the ceiling, frozen beneath the blankets. This time, I didn't turn. Didn't move. I let it happen. Tap, tap, tap. A part of me wanted to rip the blinds open, to see it with my own eyes. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew if I looked, it would see me too. And I wasn't ready for that. So I stayed still, let it tap, and eventually it stopped. I barely slept after that. I just lay there, waiting for morning. As soon as sunlight hit my window, I bolted upright, heart hammering. I grabbed my phone. Shaking fingers, opened the video. Skipped ahead. The screen stayed still for the first few hours, the window, the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., a shadow moved. I sucked in a breath, eyes locked on the screen. The hands came first, curling over the edge of the window frame, fingers pressing into the glass. Then, slowly, they pulled up. I stopped breathing. The hands didn't just grip the window this time. They were trying to lift something up, something too heavy. The fingers strained, pressed harder. Then, a shape, a head, rising slowly. I felt actual nausea as I watched. The head came higher, inch by inch, as if something was dragging itself up from nothing. The features were wrong. I couldn't make them out, couldn't tell if it was a man, a woman, or something else entirely. The only thing I knew for sure, it was looking into my apartment. I slammed my phone down on the table, gasping for air. My hands were shaking. I couldn't do this. I couldn't. I grabbed my keys. I had to get out. I ended up in my car, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I should call someone, the police maybe, but what would I even say? Hey, an invisible person is climbing my window every night. I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. There had to be an explanation. Something rational. But there wasn't. And I knew, deep in my gut, this wasn't going to stop. Not on its own. I pulled out my phone again, my hands still trembling, and clicked the video once more. I forced myself to watch. Forced myself to see. The hands, the head, the thing pulling itself up. But it never fully climbed through. It just held there, watching, waiting. And then, after exactly 3 minutes, it let go. Just released, like it had never been there at all. I sat there, phone clutched in my hands, pulse thudding. I knew what I had to do. I had to stay awake. I had to see it with my own eyes. Because tonight I wasn't just going to record it. I was going to catch it. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I bought an extra camera, better one, with night vision. I set it up outside my apartment window, rigging it on a makeshift stand. If something climbed up tonight, I'd see exactly what it was. Inside, I positioned my phone in its usual spot, aimed at the blinds. And then I waited. The apartment was too quiet. I kept glancing toward the window, my stomach twisting. I felt like I had invited something in. Like by acknowledging it, I had made it real. But it was real. And tonight, I was going to prove it. 2:47 a.m. The first tap came instantly, like it knew I was waiting. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I forced myself to stay still. Tap, tap, tap. My pulse was so loud I could barely hear it. I gripped the phone under my blanket, thumb hovering over the screen. I could check the outside camera, see it from the other side. But I was scared. Scared that the moment I looked, I'd see too much. But I had to know. I swallowed hard and clicked the live feed. The screen flickered. Then, nothing. Just the window. The building's exterior. The empty wall leading down to the alley. No ledge, no fire escape. Nothing for someone to stand on. And yet, the tapping continued. I switched back to my room's camera. The hands were already there, gripping the frame. But this time, they were inside. My heart stopped. The fingers curled around the window from the inside of my apartment. I dropped the phone. Something shifted behind me. I felt it before I heard it. A presence. Something just beyond my vision, just past the edge of my bed. Then, a new sound. Not tapping. Not scratching. Something closer. the soft sound of my bedroom door unlocking. The sound of the lock turning sent a bolt of raw panic through me. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body had frozen completely, my breath stuck in my throat, my limbs locked in place beneath the blankets. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining it. Something was inside my apartment. For a split second, I convinced myself I had misheard. That it was the neighbors, that the old pipes had shifted, that I had left the door unlocked, and it was just settling. Then the handle creaked. Slowly, deliberately, I felt my stomach drop. I wasn't alone. The camera. My phone was still in my hand, the live feed still playing, the screen casting a dim glow across my blanket. I forced my fingers to move, my body trembling as I lifted the phone toward my face. The window was empty now. The hands were gone. But the door was opening. In the grainy black and white night vision feed, the knob twisted and the door slowly swung outward. A figure stood just outside my bedroom. Tall, thin. It didn't move at first, just stood there, watching. I couldn't see a face, only a shape. A void where a person should have been. Then, a step. I snapped. I threw myself out of bed, phone forgotten, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The second my feet hit the floor, the thing moved. Not rushed, not panicked, but like it had been waiting, like it had wanted me to react. I bolted for the door. No thinking, no hesitation, just pure survival. I shoved past the thing in the doorway and felt it. Not solid, not soft, something else. A shape that didn't belong, a presence that wasn't human. I didn't stop to look. I didn't even scream. I just ran. Through the darkened apartment, past the kitchen, my hand fumbled for the front door lock. I yanked it open and stumbled into the hallway, gasping. For one horrible second, I thought it would follow me, that I would turn and see it right behind me. But when I turned, the door was still wide open, and the apartment was empty. I stood there, shaking, my breath coming in ragged bursts. The hallway was silent, too silent, like everything was waiting. Then, slowly, the bedroom door, the one I had run from, swung shut, on its own. Click. I ran. I don't remember driving. I don't remember grabbing my keys, shoving my feet into my sneakers, or sprinting down the apartment stairs like my life depended on it. All I remember is the next moment standing in my car, engine running, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I stared straight ahead, refusing to look back. My body was on fire with adrenaline, my mind screaming at me to move, to drive. I didn't stop until I was parked outside a gas station on the other side of the city. The lights were bright. There were people inside. I could see them through the windows. Real people. Normal. Safe. I gripped my phone with numb fingers. The screen was still on, the video feed still open. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I turned it back toward me. Paused the video. Rewound. My breath hitched as I watched it again. The hands on the window, the fingers curling, pressing into the glass, the door unlocking on its own. And then, the moment I had shoved past it, the thing in my doorway, the moment I ran, it had turned too. But not toward me. It had turned toward the camera, toward the phone, toward the thing recording it. And in the split second before the bedroom door had closed, it had reached out, reached toward the phone. And just before the screen went dark, I saw my own face staring back. Not from the phone, not from the reflection in the window, from behind the door, from inside my own bedroom. I dropped the phone. I never went back. I called my landlord the next morning, told them I was breaking my lease. I didn't care how much it cost. I didn't care about my stuff. I never went back for it. The only thing I took from that apartment was my phone and the video, the proof. I wanted to delete it. I should have deleted it, but I couldn't. I moved cities, got a new job, a new apartment in a high-rise with no windows facing the outside walls. For a while, things were normal again. But then, the messages started. Unknown number. No text, no name. Just a file. An attachment. Every week. Always at 2:47 a.m. The same video. My apartment. My window. The hands. The door opening. And then, in the last second, before the screen goes dark, that face, that version of me, still trapped inside that room, still waiting, and every week the same message. Let me out. I had been driving all night. The kind of shift where the city feels like a different place, quieter, darker, the streets stretching endlessly beneath flickering yellow streetlights. The rides were mostly the same, tired bartenders heading home, couples too drunk to drive, office workers staring dead-eyed at their phones, wishing they were anywhere but in my back seat. By 2:30 a.m., I was ready to be done. Then the last request popped up. No profile picture, no name, just Rider A. The pickup point was on the edge of downtown, near a strip of old buildings slated for demolition. I almost ignored it. The place was mostly abandoned now, businesses closing one by one, the city swallowing the land for new development. But the payout was good, too good. So I accepted. I pulled up to the curb. The street was empty. No bars, no lights, just rows of old storefronts with boarded-up windows. The kind of place you didn't hang around after dark. I checked the app. No messages. I waited. 3 minutes passed. Just as I was about to cancel, the back door opened. The man slid in quickly. I jumped a little. I hadn't even seen him approach. "Hey," I said, forcing a casual tone. "You Rider A?" No response. He was wearing a long black coat, the kind that swallowed his frame. His hands rested in his lap, long fingers too still. A black hat covered most of his face, shadow swallowing his features. Something felt off. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Where are you headed?" He didn't answer. Then finally, his voice calm, almost mechanical. "Lincoln Street." Something in my stomach twisted. Lincoln Street was nowhere near here. It was on the other side of the city. An old neighborhood, mostly abandoned now. I had only driven through there once or twice, but I remembered it wasn't a place you went at night. "You sure?" I asked. "That's kind of far, almost outside the city limits." The man didn't move, didn't blink, just repeated flatly, "Lincoln Street." I should have canceled the ride. I should have told him to get out. But instead, I sighed and shifted into drive. The payout was good, too good. I took one last glance at him in the mirror. Something in my chest tightened. The streetlights flickered as we pulled away. The ride was quiet, too quiet. Most passengers fidget. They scroll through their phones, hum to the radio, adjust their seatbelts, something. But this guy, nothing. No movement, no sounds. Just stillness. The longer we drove, the heavier the air in the car became. I could feel it in my chest, thick and pressing, like the space had somehow shrunk without me noticing. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. His head was slightly tilted downward, shadow covering most of his face. The brim of his hat was low, but I could just barely see his mouth. He wasn't smiling, wasn't frowning either. His expression was void, like a person caught between moments, like someone who had forgotten they were supposed to be alive. The streetlights passed in streaks of orange, flashing against the windshield, against his face. I cleared my throat. "So, been out late?" No answer. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. "Just visiting someone?" Nothing. "Work?" Silence. I exhaled sharply through my nose, shaking my head. "All right, man, cool." Maybe he was just drunk, or high. Maybe he was mute, or maybe he just didn't want to talk. Fine by me. I turned up the radiolo, just enough to fill the void. Static. I frowned, glancing at the screen. The signal had died, which didn't make sense. I knew this part of the city. There was no reason for the station to cut out. I tried switching channels. More static. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The man hadn't moved. Not once. Something cold crept down my spine. I faced forward again. Just drive. The buildings thinned as we moved into the older part of town, streetlights flickering weakly above the cracked pavement. Lincoln Street wasn't a place people went anymore. It used to be a nice neighborhood, decades ago, but time had taken it. Families moved out. The city forgot about it. Now, it was mostly boarded-up houses and empty lots. I had only been out here once before, and that was during the day. It was eerie even then. At night? It felt wrong. Like the air was thicker, like the houses were watching. The closer we got, the more uneasy I felt. My fingers tightened on the wheel. "Almost there," I muttered, more to myself than him. The turn onto Lincoln Street was sharp, the road uneven under my tires. The houses were exactly how I remembered them dead. Broken windows, graffiti, a few streetlights struggling to stay alive. And then, his voice. Low, flat. "Here." I blinked. We had barely entered the street. I slowed down. Which house? The man didn't move. Didn't gesture. Just said, "Here." I let the car roll to a stop. The house in front of us was the worst one on the block. Not just abandoned. Condemned. The front door was missing. A half-ripped police notice fluttered against the wood. The windows were shattered. their gaping holes like black, empty eyes. The entire place looked wrong, like it didn't want to be seen. I frowned. "Are you sure?" No answer. I turned to look at him, and my stomach dropped. The back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. I hadn't heard anything. But he was gone. The seat belt was still buckled. I froze. A chill ran up my arms, my breath coming fast. I twisted around fully, shoving the seat forward. Nothing. No sign of him. I whipped my head back toward the house. The door was open now, swinging slightly in the breeze. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. No service. The screen flickered. I swore under my breath. Something was wrong. So fucking wrong. I hit the lock button on my doors. Clunk. Then slowly I reached for the gear shift. A sharp bang rang out. I jumped. The sound had come from behind me. From the trunk. I sat there, frozen, my breath too loud. Bang. Again. From inside the car. Like something was inside my trunk, trying to get out. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. This isn't real. But it was. Another bang louder this time. I wasn't going to check. I wasn't that kind of person. I threw the car into drive and peeled out of there, tires screeching against the pavement. My hands were slick with sweat, my knuckles white on the wheel. The road twisted and turned, my headlights barely illuminating the broken pavement ahead. I didn't stop. Not until I hit the freeway. Not until I saw the familiar glow of the city ahead. Only then did I pull over. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely put the car in park. The silence inside the car felt too loud. I glanced at my phone. Full service now. Like nothing had ever happened. I let out a shaky breath. Get out. I turned off the engine and stepped into the cold night air, my breath coming fast, uneven. I walked to the back of the car, my hands trembling. Don't do this. But I had to. I gripped the trunk handle and pressed the release. The latch clicked. The trunk swung open. Empty. Nothing inside. Just my emergency kit, a spare tire. No sign of anything. I stood there, staring, my mind racing. I wasn't crazy. I heard it. I felt it. Something had been in there. Or something had left. I slammed the trunk shut, my heart still pounding. I needed to go home. I needed to forget this ever happened. But as I climbed back into the driver's seat, I noticed something. My ride history. The trip wasn't there. No record of Rider A. No pickup. No drop-off. Like the ride had never existed. Like he had never existed. My fingers trembled as I closed the app. Put the car in drive. And slowly, without looking back, I drove home. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached. The city lights came into view, warm, familiar, safe, but they didn't comfort me. Nothing did. I couldn't stop replaying what had happened. The ride, the empty back seat, the banging in the trunk. And the worst part? The ride was never booked. I pulled into my apartment's parking lot and cut the engine. My breath was uneven, my skin damp with sweat. I forced myself to stay seated, gripping the wheel until my pulse stopped thundering in my ears. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe I was just tired. I had been driving for hours. Could I have imagined it? Number. I heard the footsteps. I heard the door open. I felt him in the car. I swallowed hard, staring at my phone screen. The app was still open, the ride history sitting there empty. But then, a notification. One I hadn't seen before. A pending trip review. My stomach twisted. I tapped on it with shaky fingers. There was no passenger name, no location, just one option. Rate your ride with Rider A. The rating screen glowed at me, waiting. 5 empty stars. I stared at it, my body suddenly ice cold. This wasn't real. I pressed 1 star just to see what would happen. The screen flickered. Then a new message appeared. A text. From Rider A. Thank you for the ride. I nearly dropped the phone. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I had to be dreaming. Another message popped up. I enjoyed our time together. My stomach turned. A final message. Let's do it again soon. I threw the phone down. My breathing was shallow, chest tight with something I couldn't even name. Number no, no, no. I grabbed the device, my fingers shaking, and checked the number. Unknown. I opened the chat, nothing was there. The messages were gone. The review request was gone. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my face. I was tired. I needed sleep. That's all this was. I locked my car and made my way inside. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the back seat, the empty space where he had been. The dream came just before dawn. I was back in the car, driving. The city was gone. The streets stretched endlessly, lined with houses that had no windows, no doors, just dark, gaping holes. I gripped the wheel, trying to stop, but I couldn't. My hands wouldn't move. Then, a whisper from the back seat, soft, amused. You pick me up. My breath hitched. I looked in the mirror. A man sat in the back seat, but it wasn't him. His face was blurred, flickering, like static on an old television. I like this game, he said. I tried to wake up, tried to jerk myself out of it, but the dream held me there. The man leaned forward, his face shifting, morphing, trying to form something recognizable. You'll pick me up again, won't you? I woke up gasping. The next day, I deleted the app. I told myself that was enough. That if I just stopped driving, if I stopped picking people up, I would be safe. But I knew deep down that wasn't true. Because later that night, when I got back in my car to run errands, the seatbelt in the back was still buckled. I never picked up another passenger again. But sometimes, when I drive alone at night, I hear the seat creak. I hear breathing behind me. And when I glance in the rearview mirror, for just a second, I see a shape in the back seat, waiting.